Imagine if the most iconic image in human history was a lie. What if the face of Jesus Christ, often portrayed with fair skin and European features, wasn't the person depicted in paintings, stained glass windows, or Hollywood films? What if the truth, buried under layers of cultural and theological reshaping, was more complex, more diverse, and undeniably African? This isn't about rewriting history for shock value. It's about peeling back the layers of myth and misconception to uncover a truth that has profound implications for faith, identity, and justice today. For centuries, the face of Jesus has been portrayed through a European lens, but the historical, geographical, and cultural evidence tells a very different story. Let's embark on this transformative journey together, a journey that challenges what we think we know about the Savior, his identity, and his relevance in a world still grappling with issues of race and representation. To understand the roots of this untold story, we must first place Jesus in his historical and geographical context. Jesus was born in Bethlehem, a small town in 1st century Roman Judea, a region at the crossroads of Africa, Asia, and Europe. This location is far from incidental. It situates Jesus in a melting pot of cultures, ethnicities, and histories. The ancient world wasn't neatly divided by the racial categories we recognize today. Instead, it was a dynamic tapestry of peoples moving across regions due to trade, migration, and conquest. In this context, understanding Jesus' identity requires us to think beyond modern racial constructs and acknowledge the diversity of his world. When we delve deeper into the Gospels, we uncover striking connections between Jesus and Africa. Take, for example, the story of the Holy Family's flight to Egypt. According to the Gospel of Matthew, Mary, Joseph, and the infant Jesus fled to Egypt to escape King Herod's murderous decree. This wasn't a brief layover. It's believed that Jesus' family lived in Egypt for several formative years, blending into the local, predominantly African population. Egypt wasn't just a random hideout for the Holy Family. It had long been a place of refuge for Jewish communities. From the time of the patriarchs to the Babylonian exile, Africa played a vital role in the spiritual and historical narrative of the Jewish people. For Jesus, these early years in Egypt weren't merely about survival. They were formative in shaping his understanding of the world, exposing him to African culture, traditions, and communities. This African chapter in Jesus' life is more than a historical footnote. It symbolizes Africa's central role in the story of salvation, a role often overlooked in traditional narratives. The continent that sheltered Israel during times of famine and hardship also provided sanctuary for the Messiah. This African connection isn't about token representation, it's a profound truth woven into the fabric of Jesus' life and ministry. Now, let's shift our focus to how Jesus has been depicted throughout history. In the earliest centuries of Christianity, Jesus' image reflected the diverse communities that embraced his teachings. Early Christian art in Egypt, Ethiopia, and other parts of Africa portrayed Jesus with dark skin, woolly hair, and features that resonate with African identity. These depictions weren't accidental. They reflected the understanding of Jesus' heritage held by some of the oldest Christian communities in the world. Contrast this with the image of Jesus that dominates much of Western Christianity today, a fair-skinned, blue-eyed figure that owes more to Renaissance aesthetics than historical accuracy. The transformation of Jesus' image from a man rooted in the Middle Eastern and African context to a European icon is a story of power, politics, and cultural dominance, a story we'll unravel as we move forward. Why is it so important to reclaim this forgotten narrative? For people of African descent, the image of a black Jesus isn't just about historical accuracy. It's a profound act of reclaiming identity and dignity within a faith that has often been weaponized to marginalize them. It challenges the narrative that whiteness is closer to godliness and affirms that African features, culture, and heritage are integral to the story of salvation. But this isn't just about representation for one group. For all of us, embracing the African roots of Jesus invites us to confront our biases, expand our understanding of history, and reimagine a faith that truly reflects the diversity of human experience. It's a call to see Jesus not as a figure confined by cultural stereotypes, but as someone who transcends them, a savior for all people. As we journey further into this untold story, we'll explore the evidence that supports Jesus' African heritage, uncover how his image was whitewashed over centuries, and delve into the profound implications of reclaiming this narrative for our modern world. This isn't just a history lesson, it's a transformative exploration of faith, identity, and justice. Stay with me as we peel back the layers of history to uncover the real story of Jesus, a story that has been waiting, for centuries, to be told. The evidence of Jesus' African heritage lies not just in the pages of Scripture, but in the very geography and culture of the world he inhabited. To understand this, we must look closer at the cultural crossroads of first-century Judea, where Jesus' life unfolded. This land, nestled between Africa, Asia, and Europe, was a vibrant intersection of civilizations where ethnic diversity was not merely a possibility but a reality. Bethlehem and Nazareth, the towns where Jesus was born and raised, were part of Roman-occupied Judea, a region shaped by trade, migration, and conquest. The people of this area were a mosaic of ethnicities, with complex ancestries reflected in their physical features, traditions, and customs. This was not a homogeneous society, but one where identities interwove through shared experiences. One compelling piece of evidence for Jesus' African connection is his family's flight to Egypt, as described in the Gospel of Matthew. Fleeing King Herod's wrath, Mary, Joseph, and the infant Jesus sought refuge in Egypt, a land that had long been a sanctuary for Jewish exiles. The fact that the Holy Family could flee to Egypt and integrate into its society suggests they were not so visually distinct from the local population. In a region where darker skin tones were common, this ability to blend in underscores their connection to Africa's rich cultural and ethnic diversity. The time Jesus spent in Egypt was not merely a moment of survival but a formative experience. Picture the young Jesus walking through the streets of Egyptian cities, hearing its languages, and absorbing its traditions. These early years exposed him to a diversity of culture and belief that would influence his teachings and ministry. His experiences were not limited to one culture but encompassed a breadth of perspectives that reflected the interconnectedness of Africa, the Middle East, and beyond. The African connection is further evidenced in the Gospel accounts of Simon of Cyrene, the man compelled to carry Jesus' cross. Cyrene, located in what is now Libya, was a North African city with a significant Jewish population. Simon's presence in Jerusalem and his pivotal role in the Passion narrative highlight the historical ties between African and Jewish communities. Africans were not peripheral to the story of Christianity. They were integral participants, shaping its early moments and bearing witness to its most profound events. Early Christian art provides additional clues to Jesus' heritage. In regions like Egypt and Ethiopia, some of the oldest surviving depictions of Jesus show him with dark skin, woolly hair, and features distinctly aligned with African identity. These were not accidental choices. They reflected how early Christians, particularly in Africa, understood Jesus' appearance. The Coptic Christians of Egypt have long preserved traditions of portraying Jesus with features that mirror their own, not as an act of projection but as a reflection of their belief in his heritage. The Ethiopian Church, one of the oldest Christian traditions in the world, offers another testament to this connection. Christianity arrived in Ethiopia in the 4th century, and Ethiopian iconography has consistently depicted Jesus with African features. This tradition has persisted for nearly 2 millennia, unaltered by the European influences that would later reshape Christianity elsewhere. These depictions are not modern reinterpretations. They are deeply rooted in how these communities have understood Jesus since the earliest days of their faith. Descriptions of Jesus in early Christian texts, though scarce, also lend themselves to this perspective. The book of Revelation describes Jesus with hair, like wool, and feet, like bronze glowing in a furnace. While these descriptions are symbolic, they align more closely with African and Middle Eastern features than with the European representations that came to dominate Renaissance art. The imagery evokes a figure deeply connected to the earth and humanity, one whose physical presence reflected the diversity of his surroundings. Archaeological findings further challenge the monolithic portrayals of Jesus that emerged in later centuries. Skeletal remains, ancient artifacts, and historical records reveal a Judean population characterized by a wide range of physical traits, shaped by centuries of migration and cultural exchange. This diversity underscores the likelihood that Jesus, as a man of his time and place, would have embodied the rich ethnic complexity of his homeland. Beyond physical appearance, Jesus' African heritage is reflected in the themes and values of his teachings. His emphasis on community, the dignity of the marginalized, and the interconnectedness of all people resonates deeply with African spiritual traditions. These traditions often prioritize communal harmony and the recognition of humanity's shared essence, echoing the core principles of Jesus' message. It is as though the cultural influences of Africa found expression in his universal teachings. Recognizing Jesus' African heritage enriches our understanding of his identity and challenges us to see him as a figure who transcended the boundaries of his time. The image of a Black Jesus is not about exclusivity or erasure but about inclusivity, acknowledging the fullness of his humanity and the multicultural roots of the Christian faith. This perspective invites a deeper appreciation of Jesus' role as a bridge between diverse peoples and a unifying figure whose message speaks to all. The journey of understanding Jesus' African heritage is inseparable from the story of how his image was reshaped over centuries. This transformation did not happen by chance. It was the result of deliberate choices made by those in positions of power, seeking to align the image of Jesus with their own cultural and political agendas. The portrayal of Jesus as a European figure emerged gradually, reflecting the priorities of empires, rulers, and institutions rather than the historical and geographical realities of his life. In the earliest days of Christianity, there was no consistent depiction of Jesus. Early Christian communities focused more on symbols, such as the fish or the shepherd, to represent Christ. This symbolic approach was partly influenced by Jewish traditions that prohibited graven images and partly by the desire to emphasize Jesus' teachings and resurrection over his physical form. For these communities, the exact appearance of Jesus was less important than the message he carried. The turning point came with the conversion of Emperor Constantine in the 4th century. Constantine's embrace of Christianity marked its transformation from a persecuted minority faith to the official religion of the Roman Empire. This new status brought with it profound changes, not only in theology but also in how Jesus was visually represented. As Christianity became intertwined with imperial power, there was a growing desire to make Jesus relatable to the Roman elite. Artists began to draw on Greco-Roman aesthetics, portraying Jesus with features that aligned with their ideals of beauty and divinity: fair skin, straight hair, and a commanding presence. This Romanization of Jesus served a dual purpose. It made the faith more palatable to a predominantly European audience and legitimized the political authority of Christian rulers. By depicting Jesus as someone who resembled the ruling classes, the Church reinforced its alignment with imperial power. This trend continued as Christianity spread further into Europe during the Middle Ages, with depictions of Jesus becoming increasingly Europeanized. The medieval period saw the consolidation of this image through religious art commissioned by European monarchs and the Church. In these works, Jesus was often depicted as a figure of European nobility, with features that mirrored those of the patrons or the artists themselves. These depictions were not necessarily acts of conscious erasure but reflected the cultural norms and assumptions of the time. For the people creating and viewing these images, a Jesus who looked like them felt more immediate and accessible. The Renaissance brought about another significant shift. Artists such as Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo created iconic depictions of Jesus that remain influential to this day. While their works brought new levels of realism and emotional depth, they also further entrenched the image of a white, European Christ. These masterpieces were celebrated not just for their artistic merit but also for their ability to project an idealized version of divinity that resonated with European audiences. In many ways, these images became the standard against which all others were measured, overshadowing the more historically grounded depictions from earlier traditions. The age of European exploration and colonization amplified the reach of this image. As European powers expanded their influence across the globe, they brought with them their version of Christianity, complete with a white Jesus. This depiction became a tool of colonization, used to assert the superiority of European culture and justify the subjugation of non-European peoples. Missionaries played a key role in this process, presenting a Europeanized Jesus as the universal savior while erasing or marginalizing local expressions of Christianity. The impact of this whitewashed Jesus was particularly devastating in the context of the transatlantic slave trade. Slave owners and pro-slavery theologians used the image of a white Christ to justify the enslavement of African people, portraying whiteness as closer to godliness and blackness as a mark of inferiority. This distorted theology became a cornerstone of the racial hierarchies that shaped the Americas and continues to influence perceptions of race and faith today. Even after the abolition of slavery, the image of a white Jesus persisted as a symbol of racial and cultural dominance. In the United States, for example, depictions of a white Christ were used to reinforce segregation and the idea of white superiority. This version of Jesus became so deeply ingrained in Western Christianity that it was rarely questioned, even as it perpetuated harmful stereotypes and excluded non-European communities from fully seeing themselves reflected in their faith. Theological interpretations also played a role in cementing this image. European and American theologians often read their own cultural biases into the Bible, portraying Jesus in ways that aligned with their worldview. This Eurocentric lens shaped not only how Jesus was depicted but also how his teachings were understood, often emphasizing themes of order and hierarchy over justice and liberation. Despite these distortions, the roots of a more diverse and inclusive understanding of Jesus have never been completely erased. In the 20th century, movements such as the Harlem Renaissance, the Civil Rights Movement, and liberation theology began to challenge the dominant narratives. Black theologians and artists reclaimed the image of a black Jesus as a source of empowerment and a reminder of his solidarity with the oppressed. These efforts sparked a broader conversation about representation, justice, and the true identity of Jesus. The erasure of Jesus' African heritage was not merely an artistic or cultural choice. It was a deeply political act with far-reaching consequences. By aligning Jesus with whiteness, powerful institutions used his image to reinforce systems of oppression and exclusion. Reclaiming the historical and cultural truth of Jesus' identity is not just about correcting historical inaccuracies. It is about confronting the legacies of these systems and creating a more just and inclusive vision of faith. The story of Jesus, as reshaped through centuries of whitewashing, holds a mirror to the way history has been written and rewritten by those in power. However, this transformation did not occur in a vacuum. It was deeply intertwined with the socio-political currents of the time, serving the agendas of empires and institutions. By examining this process, we uncover not only the erasure of Jesus' African heritage, but also the broader patterns of domination and exclusion that had shaped our world. The intertwining of Christianity with the Roman Empire marked a pivotal moment in this transformation. When Emperor Constantine made Christianity the official religion of the empire, the faith became a tool of statecraft. To solidify this union, the image of Jesus was adapted to reflect the values and aesthetics of the empire. Roman artistic traditions emphasized symmetry, order, and a certain ideal of beauty that aligned with their concept of divinity. By depicting Jesus with these characteristics, the Church aligned his image with imperial authority, making him a symbol of unity and power. This alignment with imperial ideals continued to evolve as Christianity spread across Europe. In medieval art, Jesus was often depicted as a majestic, king-like figure, with golden halos and robes befitting a ruler. These images served not only to inspire devotion but also to legitimize the authority of monarchs who claimed to rule by divine right. In this context, the whiteness of Jesus was not incidental. It was a reflection of the European worldview that equated divinity with their own cultural identity. The Renaissance amplified this trend, with its focus on humanism and the rediscovery of Greco-Roman ideals. Artists like Michelangelo and Raphael drew inspiration from classical art, creating images of Jesus that emphasized physical perfection according to European standards. These depictions, celebrated for their beauty and craftsmanship, became the definitive image of Christ for much of the Western world. Nonetheless, they also reinforced the notion that Jesus belonged to European culture, further marginalizing the diverse communities that had embraced Christianity from its earliest days. The spread of European colonialism took this image to every corner of the globe. Missionaries, often working hand in hand with colonial powers, presented Christianity as a package deal, a faith intertwined with European culture, values, and aesthetics. In this context, the image of a white Jesus became a symbol of cultural superiority, used to justify the colonization and conversion of non-European peoples. This process erased local expressions of Christianity and imposed a Eurocentric worldview that devalued the cultures and identities of colonized peoples. Nowhere was this more apparent than in the Americas during the era of slavery. The image of a white Jesus was used to reinforce the ideology of white supremacy, portraying blackness as incompatible with divinity and salvation. Slave owners co-opted Christianity to justify the dehumanization of African people, using distorted interpretations of Scripture to argue that slavery was part of God's plan. The whiteness of Jesus became a powerful tool in maintaining these systems of oppression, embedding racial hierarchies into the fabric of the faith. Even after the abolition of slavery, the legacy of this distorted theology persisted. In the Jim Crow era, white churches often clung to the image of a white Jesus as a way to uphold segregation and racial inequality. This version of Jesus was not just a religious figure, but a cultural icon that reinforced the status quo. For many people of color, this created a painful disconnect between their faith and their lived experiences, making it difficult to see themselves fully represented in the story of salvation. Nevertheless, amid this history of exclusion and erasure, there have always been voices pushing back. The African American Church, for example, has long been a space of resistance and reclamation. Through gospel music, sermons, and art, Black Christians have reimagined Jesus in their own image, emphasizing his solidarity with the oppressed. This reclaiming of Jesus as a figure of liberation has been a powerful counter-narrative, challenging the dominant image of a white Christ and offering a vision of faith rooted in justice and equality. The liberation theology movement further expanded this vision, connecting the story of Jesus to struggles for freedom and human dignity around the world. In Latin America, Africa, and beyond, theologians emphasize the ways in which Jesus' teachings resonate with the experiences of marginalized and oppressed communities. This perspective reframes the gospel as a message of empowerment, calling for systemic change rather than passive acceptance of injustice. Reclaiming the image of a Black Jesus is not just about representation. It is about recentering the voices and experiences that have been pushed to the margins. By acknowledging Jesus' African heritage, we open the door to a more inclusive and authentic understanding of Christianity, one that celebrates its diverse roots and challenges the forces of exclusion that have shaped its history. This process also forces us to confront the ways in which power and privilege have influenced the interpretation of faith. It invites us to ask difficult questions about who has been excluded from the story of Christianity and why. These questions are not just academic, they have real implications for how we live out our faith today, shaping our understanding of community, justice, and the image of God. The story of Jesus as a man deeply connected to Africa is not a new narrative. It is a story that has been waiting to be reclaimed. It challenges us to move beyond the simplified, Eurocentric portrayals that have dominated for so long and to embrace a more complex, nuanced vision of who Jesus was. This is not about rewriting history. It is about recovering a truth that has been buried for centuries, a truth that has the power to transform how we see ourselves and each other. The reclamation of Jesus' African heritage is not only about addressing historical inaccuracies, but also about grappling with the profound implications of his identity in today's world. The image of a Black Jesus stands as a powerful symbol, challenging entrenched systems of racial inequality and offering a more inclusive vision of faith. This reframing is deeply relevant in a world still wrestling with the legacies of colonialism, slavery, and systemic racism. For many people of African descent, rediscovering Jesus' African roots provides a profound sense of representation and belonging. For centuries, the dominant portrayal of Jesus as a white, European figure has perpetuated the idea that divinity and whiteness are intrinsically linked. This has contributed to a broader societal narrative that devalues blackness, embedding a sense of inferiority in the minds of generations. The image of a black Jesus disrupts this narrative, affirming that African features, cultures, and histories are not just valid but sacred. The significance of this representation extends beyond aesthetics or identity politics. It resonates on a deeply spiritual level, offering a vision of Jesus as someone who understands and embodies the struggles of marginalized communities. For African Americans and other people of African descent, this reframing of Jesus provides a reminder that their experiences are not peripheral to the Christian story, they are central to it. This understanding can be profoundly healing, countering centuries of exclusion and offering a renewed sense of dignity and hope. The implications of this perspective are equally transformative for white Christians. Acknowledging Jesus' African heritage challenges the Eurocentric lens through which much of Christianity has been interpreted. It invites believers to confront their own assumptions about race, culture, and divinity, opening the door to a more expansive and inclusive understanding of faith. This process can be uncomfortable, as it requires letting go of deeply ingrained biases and embracing a vision of Christianity that centers the voices and experiences of those historically marginalized. The image of a black Jesus also carries significant implications for the broader fight against systemic racism. Throughout history, religious imagery has been used to reinforce racial hierarchies and justify oppression. Reclaiming the African identity of Jesus offers a powerful counter-narrative, challenging these systems at their core. It asserts that blackness is not a deviation from the divine image, but a reflection of it, affirming the inherent worth and dignity of black lives. This reframing of Jesus' identity also intersects with movements for racial justice in meaningful ways. In the context of the Black Lives Matter movement, for example, the story of a black Jesus serves as a theological affirmation of the struggle for equality and justice. It connects the fight against racism to the teachings and example of Christ, emphasizing his solidarity with the oppressed and his call to challenge unjust systems. This perspective transforms the gospel from a message of passive acceptance into a call to action, urging believers to actively work toward a more just and equitable world. In addition to its impact on racial justice, the recognition of Jesus' African heritage has profound theological implications. It calls for a re-examination of core Christian doctrines, such as the Incarnation, through a more inclusive lens. The idea of God becoming human takes on new depth when we consider that this humanity was embodied in a person deeply connected to Africa. It emphasizes the universal nature of Christ's mission while grounding it in the lived experiences of marginalized communities. This perspective also challenges traditional associations of whiteness with purity, divinity, and moral authority. By presenting Jesus as a figure of African heritage, it disrupts these associations and affirms the sacredness of all racial and cultural identities. It calls believers to a deeper understanding of what it means to be made in the image of God, celebrating the diversity of humanity as a reflection of the divine. The cultural implications of this shift extend beyond theology and into the realms of education, media, and representation. For too long, religious education materials and popular media have perpetuated a narrow, Eurocentric vision of Christianity. Reclaiming the image of a black Jesus offers an opportunity to challenge these norms, creating spaces for more diverse and historically accurate representations of faith. This shift has the potential to transform how Christianity is taught, practiced, and understood, fostering a more inclusive and equitable vision of the faith. The recognition of Jesus' African heritage also opens up new possibilities for interfaith dialogue and cultural exchange. By acknowledging the shared African and Middle Eastern roots of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, it highlights the interconnectedness of these traditions and creates opportunities for mutual understanding and collaboration. This perspective emphasizes the common humanity that underpins these faiths, offering a powerful counter to the divisive narratives that have often shaped their interactions. However, the process of reclaiming Jesus' African heritage is not without its challenges. For many, the image of a white Jesus is deeply ingrained, representing not only their faith but also their cultural identity. Confronting this legacy requires a willingness to engage in difficult conversations and to challenge long-held assumptions. It demands a commitment to truth and a recognition of the ways in which historical distortions have shaped our understanding of faith and identity. Despite these challenges, the potential benefits of this reframing are profound. By embracing the full complexity of Jesus' identity, we can create a vision of Christianity that is more inclusive, authentic, and transformative. It is a vision that celebrates diversity, affirms the dignity of all people, and calls believers to work for justice and reconciliation in their communities and beyond. The story of Jesus, when understood in its full cultural and historical context, extends far beyond the boundaries of race and geography. It is a story that speaks to the shared humanity of all people, but one that has often been co-opted to exclude rather than unite. The recognition of Jesus' African heritage invites us to see his life and teachings through a broader lens, one that prioritizes justice, inclusivity, and the interconnectedness of all human experiences. This interconnectedness is evident in the way Jesus' teachings resonate across cultural boundaries. His parables and sermons emphasize themes of community, compassion, and the inherent worth of every individual, values deeply rooted in African spiritual traditions. In many ways, the ethos of Jesus' message aligns with the African concept of Ubuntu, which emphasizes the idea that I am because we are. This worldview, which prioritizes communal harmony and collective well-being, mirrors the teachings of a man who sought to break down barriers and bring people together. Understanding Jesus within this framework challenges the individualistic interpretations of Christianity that have often dominated Western theology. It shifts the focus from personal salvation to a more communal vision of faith, one that calls for solidarity with the oppressed and a commitment to systemic change. This perspective not only enriches our understanding of Jesus' message, but also reclaims its radical call to justice and equality. The African roots of Jesus also remind us of the multicultural nature of early Christianity. The faith that emerged in the decades after Jesus' death was not a monolithic movement, but a dynamic, diverse community that spanned continents and cultures. From the Ethiopian eunuch baptized by Philip to the North African theologians who shaped early Christian thought, Africa has played a central role in the development of the faith. This history, often overshadowed by Eurocentric narratives, underscores the importance of reclaiming the African heritage of Jesus and the early Church. One of the most striking examples of this heritage is found in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, one of the oldest Christian communities in the world. Christianity was introduced to Ethiopia in the 4th century, and the faith has flourished there ever since. Ethiopian traditions offer a rich tapestry of beliefs, practices, and artistic expressions that reflect a deep connection to the life and teachings of Jesus. From the vibrant iconography depicting a Black Christ to the centuries-old liturgies sung in Gizi, the Ethiopian Church stands as a testament to the enduring legacy of Christianity's African roots. This legacy is not confined to Ethiopia. Across the African continent, Christianity has taken on diverse forms, blending with local traditions and creating expressions of faith that are both deeply rooted in history and uniquely African. These traditions challenge the notion that Christianity is a Western religion and highlight its adaptability and universality. They also provide a powerful counter-narrative to the colonial interpretations of Christianity that sought to erase African identities and cultures. The image of a Black Jesus is a central part of this counter-narrative. It challenges the idea that divinity must conform to European standards and affirms the sacredness of African identities. This affirmation is particularly important in a world where racial inequality remains pervasive. The image of a Black Jesus stands as a powerful symbol of resistance and empowerment, offering hope and inspiration to those who have been marginalized and oppressed. For many, this image also serves as a reminder of Jesus' solidarity with the marginalized. Throughout the Gospels, Jesus consistently aligns himself with those on the margins of society, the poor, the sick, the outcasts. His teachings emphasize the inherent worth of every individual, regardless of their social or economic status. In this light, the image of a black Jesus becomes not just a representation of historical truth but also a reflection of the values he embodied: justice, compassion, and the dignity of all people. The reclamation of Jesus' African heritage is not about erasing other cultural interpretations of his life and teachings. Instead, it is about recovering a truth that has been obscured by centuries of whitewashing and exclusion. It is a call to expand our understanding of who Jesus was and what he represents, embracing the diversity of human experience as a reflection of the divine. This perspective challenges us to move beyond the limitations of cultural stereotypes and to see Jesus as a figure who transcends boundaries, bringing people together in a shared vision of love and justice. In reclaiming this truth, we also confront the ways in which power and privilege have shaped the story of Jesus. The whitewashing of his image was not just an artistic choice but a deliberate act of erasure that served the interests of empires and institutions. By aligning Jesus with whiteness, these forces sought to legitimize systems of oppression and exclude those who did not fit their narrow vision of faith. Acknowledging this history is an essential step toward healing and reconciliation, both within the church and in society at large. The process of reclaiming Jesus' African heritage also invites us to reimagine the future of Christianity. It calls for a faith that is inclusive and equitable, one that honors its diverse roots and prioritizes the voices and experiences of those who have been historically marginalized. This vision is not just about representation, it is about creating a faith that is true to its origins and relevant to the challenges of the modern world. The journey toward this vision requires humility, courage, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. It demands that we listen to the stories and perspectives that have been silenced, and that we commit ourselves to the work of justice and inclusion. This journey is not an easy one, but it is a necessary one, a journey that leads us closer to the heart of the gospel and the radical love it represents. The reclamation of Jesus' African heritage has profound implications for the way we approach not only faith but also our understanding of history, identity, and justice. This process challenges deeply entrenched narratives that have shaped Western Christianity and, by extension, global culture for centuries. It is not just a correction of historical inaccuracies, but a call to reimagine the foundational stories that define our collective humanity. When we think of Jesus as a figure deeply connected to Africa, it transforms the way we understand the Christian story. No longer is it confined to the borders of the Roman Empire or the cultural frameworks of Europe. Instead, it becomes a narrative that is inherently global, diverse, and inclusive. This perspective underscores the universal relevance of Jesus' life and teachings, while also highlighting the specific ways in which his identity resonates with marginalized and oppressed communities. This resonance is particularly powerful in the context of modern racial justice movements. The image of a black Jesus is not just a historical truth, it is a potent symbol of solidarity with those who have been excluded, dehumanized, and oppressed. In a world where systemic racism continues to shape the lives of millions, this image offers a vision of hope and empowerment. It asserts that blackness is not a deviation from divinity but a reflection of it, affirming the inherent dignity and worth of all people. The importance of this representation cannot be overstated. For centuries, the dominance of a white, European depiction of Jesus has reinforced a narrative that centers whiteness and marginalizes other identities. This has had profound psychological and spiritual consequences, particularly for people of African descent. The erasure of Jesus' African heritage has contributed to a sense of alienation within a faith that should be a source of belonging and empowerment. Reclaiming this heritage is an act of spiritual and cultural healing, one that affirms the full humanity of those who have been excluded from the dominant narrative. This reclamation also has significant theological implications. It invites us to reconsider the meaning of the Incarnation, God becoming human in a specific time, place, and cultural context. When we recognize Jesus' African connections, we see the Incarnation not as an abstract theological concept but as a profound affirmation of humanity in all its diversity. It reminds us that God chose to enter the world not in the halls of power but among the marginalized, embracing a heritage that has often been overlooked or devalued. The recognition of Jesus' African heritage also challenges the ways in which power and privilege have shaped the interpretation of faith. For much of history, theology has been dominated by voices from Europe and North America, often to the exclusion of perspectives from Africa, Asia, and other parts of the world. This Eurocentric lens has not only distorted the image of Jesus, but also limited the ways in which his teachings have been understood and applied. By centering the African roots of Jesus, we open the door to a more inclusive and authentic vision of Christianity. This vision acknowledges the contributions of African theologians, scholars, and communities, whose voices have often been silenced or marginalized. It celebrates the rich diversity of Christian traditions, from the Coptic Church in Egypt to the vibrant Pentecostal movements of West Africa, recognizing these as integral parts of the faith rather than peripheral expressions. This broader perspective also invites us to engage with the intersections of faith, culture, and social justice in new and transformative ways. When we see Jesus as a figure who embodies the struggles and aspirations of marginalized communities, his teachings take on new depth and relevance. The Beatitudes, for example, become not just a list of virtues but a radical manifesto for justice and liberation. The parables of the Good Samaritan and the prodigal son challenge us to rethink our notions of belonging and exclusion, calling us to create a world where everyone is valued and included. The image of a Black Jesus also has profound implications for interfaith and intercultural dialogue. By acknowledging the shared African and Middle Eastern roots of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, we can foster greater understanding and collaboration among these faiths. This perspective highlights the common humanity that underpins these traditions, creating opportunities for dialogue and mutual enrichment. It also challenges the divisive narratives that have often been used to pit these communities against one another, emphasizing instead their shared commitment to justice, compassion, and the sacredness of life. In the realm of education, the recognition of Jesus' African heritage offers a powerful tool for challenging Eurocentric curricula and creating more inclusive narratives. By teaching students about the diverse cultural and historical contexts of Christianity, we can foster a deeper understanding of the faith and its relevance to people of all backgrounds. This shift has the potential to transform not only religious education but also broader discussions of history, identity, and culture. At its core, the reclamation of Jesus' African heritage is a call to confront the legacies of exclusion and erasure that have shaped our world. It is an invitation to build a more inclusive and equitable society, one that honors the diversity of human experience and affirms the dignity of all people. This journey is not without its challenges, but it is a journey worth undertaking, a journey that leads us closer to the heart of the gospel and the radical love it represents. The narrative of Jesus as a figure connected to Africa is more than a historical correction. It's a transformative lens through which we can view our understanding of faith, culture, and identity. For too long, the dominant image of Jesus has served as a reflection of the cultural and political forces that shaped its creation, often distorting the inclusive and universal nature of his message. Reclaiming the African heritage of Jesus is not just about setting the historical record straight. It's about realigning the faith with its foundational values of justice, equity, and love. This reclamation invites us to reflect on the ways in which power has influenced the portrayal of divinity. The whitewashing of Jesus was not simply an artistic trend but a deliberate effort to align Christianity with the cultural and racial norms of those in power. By presenting Jesus as a white, European figure, these portrayals reinforce the idea that whiteness was synonymous with divinity, goodness, and authority. This alignment was deeply political, serving the interests of empires, colonial powers, and ruling elites. The consequences of this distortion have been far-reaching. For centuries, the image of a white Jesus has been used to legitimize systems of oppression, from the enslavement of African people to the colonization of entire continents. It has been a tool of exclusion, used to marginalize those who did not fit the narrow definition of what was considered holy or acceptable. This legacy is evident not only in the history of Western Christianity but also in the broader societal structures that continue to perpetuate inequality and injustice. Reclaiming the African heritage of Jesus challenges these systems at their core. It asserts that divinity cannot be confined to one race, culture, or geographic region. It affirms the sacredness of all people, regardless of their background, and calls for a vision of Christianity that is inclusive, diverse, and equitable. This perspective is not just about representation, it's about reclaiming the radical essence of the gospel, a message that calls for justice, compassion, and the transformation of oppressive systems. This transformation begins with a deeper understanding of the historical and cultural context of Jesus' life. By situating him within the diverse, multicultural world of first-century Judea, we see a figure who was deeply connected to the struggles and aspirations of marginalized communities. His teachings were not abstract or detached. They were rooted in the lived realities of people navigating oppression, displacement, and injustice. This context adds layers of meaning to his message, emphasizing its relevance to the challenges we face today. The African heritage of Jesus also highlights the interconnectedness of the early Christian movement. Christianity did not emerge in isolation but within a dynamic web of cultural and religious exchange that spanned Africa, the Middle East, and beyond. From the Ethiopian eunuch in the Book of Acts to the North African theologians who shaped early Christian thought, the contributions of African communities have been central to the faith's development. Recognizing these contributions challenges the Eurocentric narratives that have dominated for so long and celebrates the rich diversity of Christian traditions. This celebration extends to the artistic and cultural expressions of faith that have emerged in African and African diasporic communities. From the vibrant iconography of the Ethiopian church to the soulful hymns of the African American tradition, these expressions offer a glimpse into the ways in which Jesus has been understood and embraced in diverse cultural contexts. They remind us that Christianity is not a monolithic faith but a tapestry of stories, songs, and symbols that reflect the experiences of its followers. The image of a Black Jesus, in particular, has served as a powerful source of empowerment and resistance. In the face of systemic racism and cultural erasure, it has provided a counter-narrative that affirms the humanity and dignity of Black people. It challenges the idea that holiness is confined to whiteness and asserts that Blackness is not only compatible with divinity but an integral part of it. This affirmation has been a cornerstone of liberation theology, civil rights activism, and other movements for justice and equality. The reclamation of Jesus' African heritage also invites a re-examination of how Christianity is taught and practiced. In many churches and religious institutions, the emphasis has been on preserving tradition rather than exploring the full complexity of the faith's history and cultural context. This approach often leaves little room for alternative perspectives, reinforcing the dominant narratives that have shaped Western Christianity. By embracing a more inclusive understanding of Jesus, we can create spaces for dialogue, learning, and growth that honor the diversity of the faith's roots. This inclusivity is essential not only for those within the church, but also for the broader world. At a time when divisions based on race, culture, and religion continue to sow conflict, the image of a Black Jesus offers a vision of unity and reconciliation. It reminds us that our differences are not barriers but bridges, opportunities to learn from one another and to build a world that reflects the values of love and justice that Jesus embodied. The journey of reclaiming Jesus' African heritage is not without its challenges. It requires us to confront uncomfortable truths about the ways in which power and privilege have shaped our understanding of faith. It demands that we listen to voices that have been silenced, and that we acknowledge the harm caused by the erasure of diverse perspectives. But it is also a journey of hope, a journey that leads us toward a more authentic, inclusive, and transformative vision of Christianity. This vision is one that celebrates the diversity of the human family while affirming our shared connection to the divine. It is a vision that calls us to confront the legacies of exclusion and injustice and to work toward a future where all people are valued and included. And it is a vision that challenges us to see Jesus not as a figure confined by cultural stereotypes but as a symbol of unity, love, and the boundless possibilities of human connection. Understanding Jesus as a figure deeply connected to Africa requires us to reconsider the ways we've constructed not just religious narratives but cultural identities and power structures. This reimagining extends far beyond theological debates. It is about reshaping our collective consciousness and addressing the deep-seated inequalities that persist in the modern world. The image of a Black Jesus, grounded in historical truth, disrupts centuries of white-dominated storytelling and invites us to see faith as a dynamic force for justice and inclusion. At its core, this reclamation underscores the importance of representation. For people of African descent, the historical erasure of Jesus' African heritage has contributed to a broader pattern of exclusion that spans many aspects of life, from art and education to religion and governance. The dominance of a white Jesus in religious iconography has often reinforced societal narratives that devalue Blackness, creating barriers to full participation and belonging. Reclaiming this narrative restores a sense of dignity and visibility, affirming that African identities are not just peripheral to the story of salvation but central to it. This restoration also speaks to the power of storytelling in shaping our perceptions of history and identity. The whitewashing of Jesus was not an isolated phenomenon but part of a larger effort to align religious narratives with the cultural and political priorities of those in power. By presenting Jesus as a figure who embodied the ideals of European beauty and authority, the dominant narrative excluded other cultural expressions and experiences, creating a faith that often felt distant and inaccessible to those on the margins. Reclaiming Jesus' African heritage disrupts this pattern, opening up space for a broader and more inclusive understanding of faith. It allows us to see Christianity as a faith that has always been shaped by diverse cultures and perspectives, from the early African theologians like Augustine and Tertullian to the rich traditions of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. This recognition challenges the notion that Christianity is a Western religion and highlights its deep roots in the global South. The implications of this reframing are profound. It calls for a reevaluation of how we teach and practice Christianity, emphasizing the importance of diverse voices and experiences in shaping the faith. It challenges religious institutions to move beyond Eurocentric interpretations and to embrace a more global and inclusive perspective. This shift is not about erasing tradition but about expanding it, creating a faith that reflects the full complexity and beauty of the human experience. In addition to its spiritual and cultural significance, the image of a Black Jesus carries powerful social and political implications. It serves as a symbol of resistance against systemic racism and oppression, challenging the structures that have long used religion to justify inequality. By presenting Jesus as a figure who aligns with the struggles of the marginalized, this image calls believers to confront the injustices of their own time and to work toward a world that embodies the values of equity and compassion. This perspective also has the potential to transform the way we engage with contemporary movements for justice and liberation. The teachings of Jesus, when viewed through the lens of his African heritage, take on new depth and urgency. They remind us that faith is not just a personal journey but a collective call to action, one that demands solidarity with the oppressed and a commitment to dismantling systems of exploitation and exclusion. For those who have historically been excluded from the dominant narrative, the image of a Black Jesus offers a powerful source of empowerment. It affirms that their stories and experiences are not just valid but sacred, deeply intertwined with the story of salvation. This affirmation can be particularly transformative for young people, providing them with a vision of faith that reflects their own identities and inspires them to see themselves as agents of change. At the same time, this reclamation invites those who have benefited from the dominant narrative to engage in a process of unlearning and relearning. It challenges white Christians, in particular, to confront the ways in which their understanding of Jesus has been shaped by privilege and to embrace a more inclusive vision of faith. This process requires humility and openness, as well as a willingness to listen to and learn from voices that have been historically marginalized. This broader perspective also fosters a sense of unity and connection, emphasizing the shared humanity that underpins the Christian story. By recognizing the African roots of Jesus, we are reminded that his message was never confined to one culture or people but was always intended to transcend boundaries and bring people together. This vision of unity is particularly important in a world marked by division and conflict, offering a path toward reconciliation and mutual understanding. The journey of reclaiming Jesus' African heritage is not an easy one, but it is a journey worth taking. It calls us to confront the legacies of exclusion and erasure that have shaped our world and to imagine a future where all people are valued and included. It invites us to see faith not as a static set of beliefs but as a dynamic force for justice, healing, and transformation. In reclaiming this narrative, we are not just rediscovering a lost piece of history. We are reshaping the way we see ourselves and each other. We are creating a vision of Christianity that honors its diverse roots and embraces the full humanity of all people. And in doing so, we are bringing the story of Jesus closer to its true essence, a story of love, inclusion, and the boundless possibilities of grace. The recognition of Jesus' African heritage is more than a historical revelation. It is a reimagining of faith that challenges centuries of exclusion and distortion. As this understanding becomes more widespread, it has the potential to transform not only how we see Jesus but also how we see each other. This is not just about correcting the record, it is about reclaiming a narrative that has been used to divide and using it instead to unite. For centuries, the image of a white, European Jesus has served as a powerful symbol of cultural dominance, perpetuating systems of racial inequality and exclusion. It has shaped the way Christianity is taught, practiced, and understood, often alienating those who do not fit within its narrow definitions. By presenting a version of Jesus that aligns with whiteness, this narrative has reinforced harmful stereotypes and justified systems of oppression, from colonialism to segregation. But the truth, once uncovered, has the power to dismantle these falsehoods and create a more inclusive and equitable vision of faith. Reclaiming the African heritage of Jesus restores a sense of balance to this story. It reminds us that Jesus was not a figure of European nobility but a man of the Middle East, deeply connected to the diverse cultural and ethnic landscapes of his time. His teachings were not designed to uphold systems of power but to challenge them, offering a vision of justice, compassion, and radical inclusion. Understanding Jesus in this light calls us to re-examine the ways we live out our faith and to confront the legacies of exclusion that have shaped our institutions and societies. This perspective also invites us to see the interconnectedness of humanity reflected in the story of Jesus. His life and ministry were shaped by the rich cultural exchanges of the ancient world, drawing on traditions and wisdom from Africa, Asia, and beyond. This global context highlights the universality of his message, which transcends boundaries of race, culture, and geography. By embracing this broader understanding, we can create a vision of Christianity that is truly inclusive, honoring the diversity of the human family while celebrating the shared values that unite us. The implications of this understanding extend far beyond the church. They speak to the broader societal challenges of inequality, injustice, and division, offering a framework for addressing these issues with integrity and compassion. The image of a Black Jesus, grounded in historical truth, becomes a symbol of resistance against systemic racism and a call to action for those committed to justice. It reminds us that faith is not a passive acceptance of the status quo but a dynamic force for change, rooted in the belief that all people are created in the image of God and deserving of dignity and respect. For communities that have been historically marginalized, this reclamation is an act of empowerment. It affirms that their identities and experiences are not only valid but central to the story of faith. It offers a vision of Christianity that reflects their realities and honors their contributions, creating a sense of belonging and inclusion that has often been denied. This affirmation has the power to transform lives, fostering hope, resilience, and a renewed sense of purpose. For those who have benefited from the dominant narrative, this understanding offers an opportunity for growth and transformation. It challenges them to confront their own assumptions and biases, to listen to voices that have been silenced, and to embrace a more inclusive vision of faith. This process is not easy, but it is essential for creating a more just and equitable society. It requires humility, openness, and a willingness to acknowledge the ways in which privilege has shaped their understanding of the world. At its heart, this journey is about reclaiming the radical essence of the gospel, a message of love, justice, and inclusion that speaks to the deepest needs of humanity. It is about seeing Jesus not as a figure confined by cultural stereotypes but as a reflection of the boundless diversity and beauty of creation. It is about recognizing that the story of Jesus is not just a story of the past, but a living narrative that continues to shape our world today. As we move forward, the task of reclaiming Jesus' African heritage invites us to rethink how we teach, practice, and share the faith. It calls for a renewed commitment to inclusivity, equity, and justice in all aspects of our lives. It challenges us to build communities that reflect the diversity of the human family, creating spaces where all people feel valued and included. And it inspires us to live out the values of love and compassion that Jesus embodied, working toward a world that truly reflects the vision of the gospel. This journey is not without its challenges, but it is a journey worth taking. It is a journey that leads us closer to the truth, closer to each other, and closer to the divine. In reclaiming the story of Jesus, we are not just uncovering a forgotten piece of history. We are transforming the way we understand faith, identity, and justice. And in doing so, we are creating a vision of Christianity that is more authentic, inclusive, and aligned with the values of love and grace that lie at its heart. The story of Jesus is, ultimately, a story of hope. It is a story that reminds us of the power of truth to overcome falsehood, of justice to triumph over oppression, and of love to bridge even the deepest divides. By embracing this story in its fullness, we can create a world that reflects the boundless possibilities of faith, a world where all people are seen, valued, and loved.